All right, I'm making a video on the challenge that I set out for myself and that I gave to everybody who cared to watch, and that is this year, like you should do every year, you should expand your knowledge and open your mind, not just expand your knowledge. And one way to open your mind is, as a dog trainer especially, is to read something you normally wouldn't feel comfortable reading, or something you normally would not read, or attend a seminar that you normally would not attend. In this particular case, the challenge was more, read something that you normally wouldn't read. So if you're a balance trainer, read a book by a purely positive author. If you're a purely positive trainer, try to read a book by a balance training author. That way you can expand your knowledge and see a different perspective. Even if you completely disagree, at least you can get used to seeing different perspectives versus just, seeing things your way. So that's what I did. I grabbed this book yesterday from the library. It's called Dog Sense by John Bradshaw. I did part one of this. It was a little bit on the negative side because, I'll talk about it in more detail as I go over it. But this is a book that when I picked out of the library, I looked at the back of the book, and that's what would tell me, that's what told me this is a purely positive type book. Things like don't be alpha, I agree with that. Understand your dog's emotional limitations, I'm on board with that. Avoid punishment, right? And it says, as a rule, positive reinforcement is the best way. So all these little keywords told me this is a purely positive book. And it seems to be aimed at the pet person, right? New science of dog behavior can make you a better friend to your pet. So it seems to be aimed at the pet person. So let's get right into it. The first chapter was great. The first chapter talked about the evolution of dogs and the difference between dogs and wolves and how we got it all wrong with wolves. Talks about the dominance theory. Talks about submission. So a lot of the stuff I found very, very valuable. Reading throughout the whole book, I found myself remembering and learning some things that really added to my set of knowledge. And and like I said, some of these things just reminded me things that I had known prior to reading this book. So the first chapter went great. As I get to the middle, the chapter called Sticks and Carrots talks about training methods. And I was like, great, this is really going to talk about the meat and potatoes of the book, right? The training approach that this book is promoting. And it wasn't so much promoting any particular type of dog training. It was mostly bashing the whole time. It was bashing negative reinforcement. It was bashing positive punishment, negative punishment. And if you don't know the difference between those three, I strongly recommend that you look into that you do your research. As a dog trainer, you should have an idea of what those are. And, the author goes as far as saying punishment doesn't really work, which is BS. If you know the quadrants, if you understand the scientific perspective of the quadrants, you know that they do work. Otherwise, they would not be classified as specific, set quadrants. So, anyways, the one little thing where he said seemed kind of positive was, under skilled hands, punishment can work. So I was like, great, something positive. But then immediately that's followed by sometimes, and it's temporary. So you see the strong agenda in that chapter. You see it throughout the whole book, but in this particular chapter, you definitely see this guy is very anti anything that is force. He even goes as far as implying that negative punishment, which doesn't even involve any force, in a very subtle way, he implies that this can cause a lot of anxiety. Fast forwarding to the whole, the end of the book, this guy is, this author is citing experiments throughout the whole book. Lots of experiments. Good, valuable stuff. But as a pet owner, I would have been completely lost. It would have been very overwhelming for me. Because I'm a dog trainer, I saw the value in these experiments and the studies that that were cited. One thing I did not like about all of these experiments and the studies were that in experiments and studies, there's one strong variable that you cannot see, and that is the personality of each individual dog. That's one thing you cannot. You can't just say, I'm going to grab 100 dogs and do this study and see how they respond. there are variables, and those variables are the unique personality. That's one of them. The personality, the temperament, some of the upbringing, which he talks about that as well. So that was good. But overall, it doesn't seem to, I would have been very comfortable if he had said, one strong variable is the fact that dogs do respond different in certain scenarios because of their particular set of genetic tendencies. Just a couple of examples. He says, when puppies, if they're not exposed to people at a very young age, then it can cause fear, which I agree with. Studies do show that. As trainers, we do know that. But you also, if you have experience working with dogs, working with puppies, you do know that there are puppies that even if you do very little contact with people, because of their temperament, because of their personality, they can still do very well. That's a variable. Another thing is you could do everything right, and then the puppy could turn out to be very antisocial. They don't like people. So those are little variables that you have to take into account. You can't just say, this is what we did with dogs, and this is what we observed, and therefore this is what it is. So there are things on here that he just, like a lot of scientists do, a lot of animal psychologists do, they go, science, 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 which I'm 100% with, 100% for. But we can't overlook the side of practical experience. We can't overlook that there are things where science doesn't always go, oh well, that's that it shouldn't do that, because that happens, right? These studies don't always take personality and the way a dog responds to its environment based on its personality. Some of these variables are very important. He talks about separation anxiety. One thing that I really did like about the book was one chapter he talks about, the title of this chapter is, Does Your Dog Love You? And I found that chapter very valuable, because it does say how the problem with a lot of pet people, or a lot of people in general, is that they hold their dogs to a very high standard because we want to give them human emotions. He talks about that being a huge problem, and it's true. That is a huge problem in the pet industry. Your average pet owner thinks that their dog should have a set of human traits. When they fail to meet certain expectations that we give them based on those human traits that we expect them to have, then we have an issue. Then we take it personally. We become emotional. So he talks about that, and that was a great, great chapter. Overall, this book was great. If you are a dog trainer, this is a great book, because it will definitely give you things to think about. You will get to see a lot of studies cited. As a pet trainer, this might be, as a pet person, as a pet owner, this might be a little bit overwhelming. But as a dog trainer, good source. Overall, you need to be able to look at the author's agenda. And this author does have an agenda. He's very purely positive. As long as you understand the author's agenda and get the most out of that book, you'll be all set.